You know, lawsuits can get messy. But what happens when they get really messy? Like when people on the same side start suing each other within the same case? Well, the Supreme Court of India recently weighed in on this and they drew a very, very clear line in the sand.
Okay, so let's break this down. Imagine this scenario. Your boss is suing you and a coworker. You're on the same team, legally speaking, but then you remember that coworker scratched your car last week. So here's the question. Can you use your boss's lawsuit as a chance to sue your coworker for the car scratch? It just feels kind of weird, right? Like it doesn't belong there. And that's pretty much the exact puzzle the Supreme Court had to figure out. So in legal speak, this move is called a counterclaim. Think of it like a legal counterpunch. The person suing you, the plaintiff, throws a punch, and you, the defendant, can throw one right back in the very same fight. But here's the million-dollar question. Can you aim that counterpunch at someone else in the ring? You know, someone other than the person who sued you to begin with.
So back to our question. Can you sue your teammate, your co-defendant? Well, we're not going to make you wait for the answer. The Supreme Court was incredibly clear about this.
And the answer is a big, resounding nope. The court's ruling was unambiguous. A defendant cannot, I repeat, cannot, file a counterclaim against another defendant. So, in our little story, that means you absolutely can't sue your coworker about the car. That's a whole separate issue, and it needs its own separate lawsuit.
Okay, so we know the what, the big no. But the how and why this simple question ended up at the Supreme Court, that's where the real story is. Because of course, this wasn't about a scratched car. It was about a super complicated land deal that was stuck in the legal system for, well, a very, very long time.
So, let's meet the players. You've got the plaintiff, who kicks the whole thing off by suing Defendant 1 over a land agreement. Simple enough, right? But then, plot twist, two more people show up, Defendants 2 and 3, and they jump into the lawsuit saying, hey, wait a minute, we had a deal with Defendant 1 for that same land. And yeah, you can see how this is about to get very, very messy.
And when I say this dragged on, I mean it really dragged on. The original deal was supposedly made way back in 2002. The tricky counterclaim we're talking about, that was filed in 2006. But the Supreme Court's final decision on just this one procedural point didn't come until 2025. I mean, just think about that for a second. More than 20 years just to figure out if you can sue your teammate. Wow.
All right, so we know what the court decided, but why? What was their reasoning? Well, they didn't just say no and walk away. They laid out the logic very clearly, so let's break it down.
It all boiled down to this one specific rule in the law books, Order VIII Rule 6A of the Code of Civil Procedure. And what this rule basically says is that a counterclaim is a very specific kind of weapon. It's designed for a defendant to use against the plaintiff. It's not, a free-for-all weapon to start side fights with other defendants. So the court's logic was actually super simple. You can think of it in 3 steps. Step 1, the rule is clear. A counterclaim is for a defendant to use against a plaintiff. Step 2, what happened here? Well, defendants 2 and 3 used it against their co-defendant, defendant 1. Step 3, the conclusion? They aimed at the wrong person. It's a total mismatch with the rules, so the claim just can't stand.
And get this, it wasn't even just about this one technical error. The court looked at the claim itself and found it was, frankly, a mess. For starters, there was zero proof that any money was ever actually paid. On top of that, they were way too late. The deadline to file this kind of claim, the statute of limitations, had expired long ago. And the real kicker? They even admitted that part of the land they were fighting for had already been sold to the plaintiff's father. So yeah, this claim was doomed from pretty much every angle.
So let's look at the final verdict and talk about the bigger picture. Why does a seemingly small rule like this even matter so much?
The final outcome was exactly what you'd expect. The Supreme Court sided with the original plaintiff. They said, yep, you're right. And that counterclaim from defendants 2 and 3, it was completely thrown out. Just gone. Wiped from the legal record. And this is where the mistake really, really hurts. Because by filing their claim the wrong way, defendants 2 and 3 didn't just lose this round, they lost the entire game. The court pointed out that it was now way too late for them to start a new, proper lawsuit. Their one little procedural error cost them their entire chance to ever have their claim heard in court. The window had closed. So it brings us back to the big why. Why is the law so strict about this? Well, it's not just about red tape. It's about keeping things from descending into chaos. Think of a lawsuit as a clean, simple fight between two parties, the plaintiff and the defendant. This rule keeps it that way.
Without it, one lawsuit could explode into a dozen different side brawls between defendants. It keeps the court focused on the main event, the original reason everyone is there in the first place.
So, what's the big takeaway? This case is a perfect example of how legal rules are like the guardrails on a highway. They're there to keep everything moving in an orderly way and prevent a massive pileup. But it does leave you with a fascinating question, doesn't it? By sticking so rigidly to the rules of the road, do we sometimes prevent people from getting to the place they truly deserve to be? It's that classic, never-ending tension between strict order and what feels like true justice. And that's really what the law is all about.